Warren Sharp here talking NFL draft capital for the 2021 NFL draft, which is right around the corner. Let's define draft capital. It is the amount of value that each pick has in the draft, and not all picks are the same. The number one overall pick is going to have a lot more value than the last pick of the first round, and that's going to have substantially more value than any pick in the seventh round. To help us figure out how to go from 1 to 256, what we did is we're looking at two different metrics, one of which looks at performance delivered in the first 5 years. That's a Chase Stewart draft metric. And another one looks at dollars earned in the second contract. That's an over the cap draft metric. Combine the two together and we've got the Sharp draft value. And that's what we're going to look at to try to understand who will own the NFL draft in terms of the teams that have the most capital to spend. And to do that, let's look at those teams. We've got 5 of those teams. The first one is the Jacksonville Jaguars, second, New York Jets, third, Miami Dolphins, fourth, Atlanta Falcons, and fifth, the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the Jacksonville Jaguars own the number one overall pick. They also have 10 picks in the draft. They will have the most to spend in terms of being able to deliver on players. But let's first understand that just having most capital to spend does not necessarily mean that you're going to walk away a winner in the NFL draft. Why is that? Well, if I gave $50 to 4 different people and said, go shopping for dinner for tomorrow night, buy the ingredients for me, one guy might go in and make normal purchases in the grocery store. The second guy might go in and he just wants a big Kobe steak and some salt and pepper, and he wants a splash with that meal. The third guy might go in and get a couple things, but say, hey, the produce doesn't look good. I'm going to trade it back to next year. I'm going to come back tomorrow and get some other types of produce because I don't like what this looks like. And the last guy might look at the beer aisle and get blown away with a couple things that stand out, and then check out at the gum aisle and go crazy buying a few packs of gum. Just because you have a lot of capital and spend your $50 does not mean you're going to walk away with solid return on those players. But it is important to understand who owns the most, and that's the Jacksonville Jaguars. Clocking it at number 2, we have the New York Jets. They've already indicated that they're going to be going with a quarterback, Zach Wilson, at number 2. They have a great opportunity to turn their franchise around. They have not had a lot of draft capital over the last several years prior to last one. This is going to be a great opportunity for Joe Douglas to start rebuilding that franchise. Another team that's pretty interesting are the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons have not had hardly any draft capital to spend in recent years. And if we look back at what this team's actually had in order to spend, they ranked 21st, 19th, 24th, 31st, 25th, and 16th in their last several years since 2014 in terms of draft capital. And this is despite the fact that they have not had very many winning years. Most of the time, teams with losing records and losing years will get more draft capital because the NFL is trying to make everything fair and balanced and distribute those picks equitably. The worst team is going to get the better picks. But the Falcons have not really been focused on building through the draft. Previously, new GM for the first time in a long time, and they have a lot of draft capital. It'll be interesting to see what this team chooses to do. Because the NFL distributes things evenly, there are going to be your haves and there are going to be your have-nots. And the Seattle Seahawks really stand out this year as one big have-not. Here's why. Not only do they just have 3 picks in this draft, which is the fewest of any team, they have the least draft capital of any team in any year since at least 1999. Why would you throw out 1999, you might ask? Because that is the year that the New Orleans Saints traded their entire draft for the number 5 pick so that they could select the running back Ricky Williams for their team. Obviously, that ended up being a disaster for the New Orleans Saints, but the Seattle Seahawks have less draft capital in this year's draft than even the Saints did back in 1999 when they threw everything at the number 5 pick only. So really remarkable how little draft capital the Seattle Seahawks have in 2021. Another team that's really remarkable are the Houston Texans. This was a team that went 4-12 last year. They should have some of the most draft capital, but guess what? They not only have the second least draft capital in 2021, they have the least draft capital for any year in their franchise history, which started in 2002. So this team needs a lot of help, but they're not going to be able to get it in the 2021 NFL draft. Looking at a couple of other teams that stand out to me, one is the Miami Dolphins. Not only do they have the 3rd most draft capital in the 2021 NFL draft, an interesting note is that this team had a lot of draft capital. In fact, the most draft capital in the NFL in last year's draft. And what was weird about last year's draft? Well, those rookies that ended up playing in the 2020 NFL season did so with the COVID backdrop, very little time in camp. It was very difficult for those guys to get incorporated and integrated into the 2020 NFL season. So they've got a lot of guys from that class that are going to help them this year, plus one of the highest amounts of draft capital entering this draft. Combined the last 2 years, they sit as the #1 most draft capital in the NFL over the last 2 years. In addition, this year, not only do they have the third most, unlike the two teams that are ahead of them in Jacksonville and New York, Miami Dolphins don't need a quarterback. Hopefully Tua works out for them. They are not going to be drafting a quarterback in this draft, which allows them to spend all that draft capital on non-quarterbacks, which is going to be very interesting to see how they do that and how they build the roster around Tua Tagovailoa. But it will be a big benefit for them not to have to waste any of that capital on a quarterback this season. Now, the last thing that I looked at for this analysis was I wanted to get a layout for what the 2022 draft capital was going to look like. In order to do that, I had to go back into our sports betting background and look at the future season win totals for the 2021 NFL season. Why? Because that's going to help define the draft order. So I looked at the 2021 NFL win totals, assembled a draft order, accounted for whatever trades have already been made of 22 draft capital. And what I found is the Philadelphia Eagles will be sitting as having the most draft capital of any team in the NFL for the 2022 NFL season, as long as the 2021 NFL win totals and the season goes like the odds makers are currently expecting. That is going to provide them a big opportunity because, like the Miami Dolphins, if Jalen Hurts works out at quarterback, they don't need to draft a quarterback this year where they have the 5th most draft capital, and they won't need to draft a quarterback next year where they have the most draft capital. Think of how they can spend that draft capital when they don't have to go after a quarterback and they have so much of it. It will be really interesting to see how Howie Roseman spends this draft capital and what the team ends up looking like over the next couple of years.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.